Mark, are you of the school that says that the United States is in an existential struggle with China? Do you subscribe to that point of view?
This is to say, I hope that's not true, right? I hope this is not going to walk all the way to the situation that we ended up in with the Soviet Union. Like you, I grew up in an era. I'm sure. See if you remember this. I growing up thinking there was a significant chance that we're all going to die,
Yeah.
from nuclear war. And so I hope it doesn't get back to that level of intensity. But I do think there are a lot of historical parallels to what happened between the U.S. and the USSR in the 20th century. Happening right now. And, you have, two hegemonic superpowers that both have, visions, they both have visions of how society should be structured and how the sort of global political system should be structured. And obviously I think, America's is better, but they both have visions. They're both working, to that end. And then they both have, national strengths and weaknesses militarily, technologically, economically, culturally. There is that kind of geopolitical fight happening. So I hope we stay in this kind of, I don't know what you call it, mode of co-opetition, tension without military strife. I hope we stay, in that mode, but it's a sufficiently fraught situation, that we certainly need and by the way, have a national strategy for how to win that. And we need to make sure that we do.
Right. Do they have any one or two advantages over us in terms of AI?
Yeah, they do. So they have they have two advantages. And by the way, I should say we have many advantages. I'm very bullish on the U.S. and I think we're better positioned. I wouldn't trade places with them, and we could talk about that. But having said that, they do have strengths, and in particular, they have two key strengths. Number one is they do have the advantages of a command economy. Generally speaking, or 100%, I'm on the side of free markets and decentralization and, having a dynamic economy. And we have advantage, we have much better entrepreneurial ecosystem and so forth. Having said that, they do have this advantage where when their government decides that something's a national priority, they just do it. And by that, I mean, not only does the government do it, but they just tell the private sector, you do the following. Right, and so they have this thing the Soviets had where the entirety of society is able to go up against single missions. We're just a lot more fractious than that, and so we kind of navigate our way through this on our own way, but not we don't have anywhere near that level of organization. So that gives them the ability to execute against specific areas of focus in arguably a superior way. And then the other advantage that they have is we in the U.S. voluntarily deindustrialized starting 30 or 40 years ago, that industrialization the making of physical things and in particular the making of machines has moved substantially to China. The way that we think about machines now is that they're basically they're the hardware version of software, right? They're the embodied version of AI. The car is not just steel and glass anymore. It's a robot on wheels. The drone isn't just a toy anymore. It's a computer, that flies through the air, that navigates itself. Robots are coming. We're gonna live in a world that's just completely awash with robots in the decades ahead. And China's just as a consequence of the last 30 years of policy, China's just way ahead on everything involved in building physical things. This administration and others have had visions of how to recapture that, but we have a long way to go.
As the U.S. tries to become more of a manufacturing country, it would seem to me AI integrated into manufacturing is extremely powerful. Yeah. Are they ahead of us on that? As you said, our biggest companies here are slow adapters of AI. Are there big manufacturers now using AI more than we are?
Yeah. So I think unleashed, we could do that faster and better. If we could manufacture in the U.S. the way that we used to 30 or 40 years ago, we could definitely do that faster for a variety of reasons, including we have better software engineers. We have a more flexible and dynamic economy. We could do that faster. The big issue is just we have chosen to not be a manufacturing economy. We chose to move that offshore. For a very long time we were very proud that we moved that offshore for a variety of reasons. And so the challenge is not so much that that we couldn't in theory do exactly what you just described better than they can. It's just if you're not manufacturing things, then you can't do that at all, right? Which is the situation that we've worked ourselves into. And so their car, just to pick one, their car industry is moving incredibly fast at this. Look, we have to, we have our superstar companies. We have Tesla, in particular that's world class at this, and still, better than the Chinese today. But the Chinese are moving really fast. And if you talk to people, we don't have a lot of exposure to Chinese cars in the U.S. because the trade barriers are so high that they really are not cost effective to sell here. But if you go to the Middle East and talk to just like normal affluent people, they're now driving Chinese cars by choice. Not because they can't afford a Mercedes, because the Chinese cars are better, and the Chinese cars are like full self-driving, electric, autonomous, voice AI. Like they're like state of the art. They're exactly what you're talking about. And we still have car companies, but ex-Tesla, mainly what they do is they assemble, third party, parts that are coming from other places. The Chinese are just doing a much more specific, advanced level of unified hardware and AI manufacturing. By the way, you see that in drones, like virtually the entire global drone industry and virtually the entirety of the drone industry, in terms of people using drones in the U.S., like virtually 100% of those drones are made in China. And again, that's not because we couldn't make them; it's because we chose a set of policies that drove that industry off.
We better start making them. If you're 64 years old or older, this is an important announcement. The Department of Justice recently sued 3 major Medicare brokers for claiming they were unbiased while allegedly pushing people into plans that got them the biggest kickbacks. It's true, so many insurance agents, they just can't be trusted, but you also cannot rely on the government to give you the best information that you need either. That's why I want you to know about something called Chapter. Chapter was started by people who went through all of this personally after their own parents were pushed into the wrong Medicare plan by an agent who was more focused on commissions than on good care. Chapter's mission is very simple. They want to give every American the honest, straightforward Medicare advice that they deserve. And here's what makes them different from everybody else. They're the only Medicare advisor that compares every plan nationwide, not just a few. That saves their clients an average of $1,100 a year. There's really no reason not to call. It's quick, it's easy, and they can review your options in under 20 minutes. If you're in the right plan already, they'll let you know that. But if there's a better plan, they'll help you make the switch. This could be the most important call you make this year. Dial pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare to get peace of mind. Again, that's pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare.